Thank you very much, Meir. From my own non-proliferation perspective, I special thanks for recognizing that the Turkish-Brazil-Iranian nuclear deal was a very bad deal. And the reason it was rejected is because it was a bad deal, not because Obama was being too harsh on Iran. We have just over 15 minutes. We have to stop at 5:45 sharp. So I think we'll have a round of questions. Yes.
I have 3 questions to each of the speakers. Ehud, you differentiate between Erdogan and Davutoglu in the sense of Erdogan is the vision, the glory thing, but if I am not mistaken, Davutoglu has this vision of, 2003, etc. So I think he is behind the vision of glory, no less, if not more, than Erdogan himself. You draw a kind of, I think, a static picture of the period of the AKP, but I think we should differentiate between the 3 terms, because the first term was one thing and the third term was different in terms of Islamism, liberalism, and foreign policy. So we cannot look at this as, as one thing. And to Meir, I think you omitted a very important point, and this is the Sunni-Shia axis and how this is influencing the relationship between these 2 countries. And also you mentioned that Turkey is being, the government in Iran is fearing Turkey being a model, but Turkey has been modeled there for 10 years. So what is new now?
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
You spoke about eventually in the future that there will be a Kemal Atatürk in Persia, in Iran. To my knowledge, the first Pahlavi, he threw out the Najjar dynasty, and he was very befriended with Atatürk, and he wanted to follow the model of Atatürk. What happened when he was ousted in 1941 by the English? What happened then to Iran?
Yeah, here, over here.
Dr. Kesebaran, you alluded to the strong component of Islamism in AKP's foreign policy, which is really the biggest change comparing to previous governments. Could you please manifest, what is the manifestation of Islamism in current or contemporary Turkish foreign policy?
Okay, I think we can take one more if there, does anyone? Okay, I want to add one question to the professor. I'm interested, I'm sure you're familiar with this idea to hold a WMD free zone conference in the Middle East, and I was wondering if you could maybe say a few, now it seems that it might be off the table. We haven't had the official announcement from the United States, but it looks like it might be off the table for now. But in any case, if you could speak a little bit about how Turkey saw its role vis-a-vis that kind of regional dialogue. Was it part of the dialogue or part of the, extra-regional players with regard to that regional dynamic? I think we'll go in reverse order. So,
okay.
Yes.
You're absolutely right about the Sunni-Shiite divide. But again, when it comes to Sunni-Shiite divide, the country that first jumps into my mind is Saudi Arabia, in terms of emphasizing the Sunni nature of the problem with Iran. In terms of Sunni-Shia, that is far more Saudi Arabia than Turkey. Although Turkey that is one of the issues, I would say I would put the Sunni-Shia as a much more important factor in Iran-Saudi relations and tensions than Turkey-Iran. Although it is one of the factors, it's not the biggest factor. Turkey being a model since 10 years ago, what has changed? Well, one of the things that's changed is the Green Revolution, Green Movement in Iran. The Green Movement calls for reform, small reform, where everybody has a say, including the Islamists. Now, the Turkish model is become more popular because the Turks include everybody. The Turks include the secularists and the Islamists. And I think this is one of the reasons why it's become a more appealing model for the Iranians. And of course, while the Turkish government has become Islamized, it has managed to maintain its relations with NATO. It's not like in Iran where we had a revolution and of course what happened was we took over the American embassy and you know what happened to the rest. The Turkish government has done it in a very intelligent way, very sophisticated way, where they've become Islamists and they've maintained their good relations with NATO and they've maintained good relations with the EU. This is why I think the Turkish model is becoming more and more popular in Iran. The issue of Reza Shah, the father, he had very good relations with Ataturk, of course. And you know, there's great nostalgia to those in Iran who just want a secular, almost dictatorship today. They really, there's a lot of nostalgia in Iran. This is one thing that actually worries me when I look at the opposition in Iran. We have many people who want democracy, of course, but there are some people who are so sick and tired of abuse of their lives with the name of Islam and politicization of Islam, which has made their lives far more miserable, that they're calling for secular dictatorship. And what they're looking for is an Ataturk, our version, which was Reza Shah. This is despite the fact that Reza Shah, yes, he did many great things, but he also killed a lot of people.
Ataturk also.
Okay. So what happened? Reza Shah, why was he kicked out? Because Reza Shah wanted to become independent, and the problem was he became too close to the Nazi Germany, and he maintained his relations with them during the Second World War, and the Brits and the Russians did not like that. And I think had he been more intelligent and tried to balance his own relations with all sides, he would have stayed in power. Then came his son in his place, which, bless him, he was great in many ways. But in other ways, this guy wouldn't take a decision without consulting the British and the American ambassador, which meant that he was seen as being a weak character. This is despite all the great things that he did to Iran's economy, which is why at the end, unfortunately, that's one of the things that was used against them.
Okay, Professor?
Thank you very much. I think that's a great question because it shows that identities are never static and it's fluid, and it responds to the constraints of the time. And I think with reference to the Kemalism, we also need to understand that Atatürk's experience was an experience in the 1920s and 1930s, and before that in the War of Independence. And now bringing that to the context of Turkey in 2012 doesn't just work. So I hope that Iranians don't go back to the 1920s and 1930s of Turkey and get their model. Rather, today's Turkey, in which Islam and democracy can be more successfully integrated. So in terms of AKP's, transitional stages, I believed I was trying to show that, but the earlier, the slide before that, I just took a picture of Turkey in 2011, before actually emergence of the Arab Spring, and that was the completion of my book. I later added only a paragraph, with the limitations of the publisher to balance that, and that was even critical of Turkey's stance about Libya, because Turkey was somewhat ambivalent, in terms of giving support. And now there's a completely different picture about Turkey and Syria relationship. That Turkey is too much in the crisis, in support of the opposition, and that crisis, I believe, will be talked in more detail in the later presentations. But that's something that concerns Turkey and Turkish public opinion. So yes, that AKP made some transitions in response to the constraints of the time. One important thing is the ambivalence response that came from the European Union. So if the European Union was much more embracing, was much more open, to Turkish membership than it is presently, then perhaps the first period's foreign policy about the pro-European attitude in foreign policy could be maintained. But right now, I mean, there is no future, there is no prospects of membership is very weak. So what a country with the size of Turkey and Turkish economy should do is to turn its face back to the east. Not only because of the Middle East, but also because of China and India. And, you know, in order to go to China and India, you need to cross the Middle East. So therefore, the first stepping stone is the Middle East. And there is very aggressive Turkish stance in terms of redesigning the order. I think that's beyond Turkish capability in some way. But that's what the present leadership wants to do. That's something different than what I personally believe. In terms of the influence of Islamism, you know, Turkish version of Islamism was never a version of Islamism which was militant. Yes, we experienced times of war in some ways, but in a way, the Turkish Islamism was much more commerce-oriented, much more, you know, so business-oriented, historically speaking. So, and now, in terms of the reflection of that in foreign policy, maybe the crisis with Israel can be shown as just one example of that. But even that, I really believe that, you know, there are some material interest-oriented reasons for, you know, to explain Turkish-Israeli crisis. One another source of tension actually with Israel and Turkey is about the WMD free zone. That Turkey wants to question Israel's own nuclear capability in terms of, you know, in terms of talking about a WMD free zone. Let's say, let's debate that, and that, you know, that's one of the sources of tension between the two countries. And you know, in order to speak about Iran's nuclear weapons, I mean, it is kind of in the minds of Turkish policymakers, and I think Turkish public opinion to a very large extent shares this view. It's kind of hypocritical to talk about Iran only. Let's also talk about Israel, and Israel's, you know, no acceptance, no denial, you know, kind of attitude about its nuclear capability needs also to be put on table. This is what Turkish government says. So, and therefore, this issue about the WMD free zone is never supported by big players, big powers, including the United States. Thank you.
Okay, I'll tell you a secret. We have some more time. That was the note that Galia passed. I will, but I'm not gonna use this up. So let me answer Professor Benjo's question by extending a bit towards the title of my talk was you know, how do you do it over such when you're situated on so many fault lines. So the point is really between two situations. 2 years ago, Galia had another conference here, and we had Soli Zel and Gün Kut, professors from Turkey, from Istanbul. And at that time, they were so enthusiastic about Turkish foreign policy, saying, look where we were 10 years ago, and look where we are now. So it was all this sense of empowerment and influence. And if you talk to them, at least in the Soli Zel and to many others today, they will tell you, look at where we got now because of all this sense of self-importance and the desire to impact a region that is so problematic and requires perhaps a different kind of approach. So the two poles that I was talking about were, one is the Ottoman approach to this region, which has so many problems, and that approach can be said, you know, you manage, you mediate, you moderate. At the other end, there are the Davutoglu and Erdogan AKP foreign policy, which is assert, provoke, up the rhetoric, and create problems where perhaps a different kind of approach might be more effective and less dangerous and less problematic. So my point is that if you are strategically, geostrategically situated the way Turkey is, then perhaps the old ways are much better than the new ones. And therefore, there will have to be a correction. There will have to be a correction. Or else many more Syrias will explode in Turkey's face, which is what the case is. Now, Erdogan, I'm also saying, yes, the ideologue of this strategic strategic depth is Davutoglu. But that's the ideology that was, but it's a different kind of a vision. Davutoglu of the past year is different from this rather soft power approach, and it has become much more abrasive, much more aggressive, and therefore, in various a series of appearances, is now, in my view at least, pushing a power narrative. More than you don't like it, tough. That's the way it's going to be. We're going to lead. That's it. Now, Erdogan is doing this through what I called, maybe it's not a very good term, but the glory narrative. He speaks on a higher level and doesn't go to, we're going to do this to you, that to you, we're going to defeat you, we're going to humiliate you. No, he's above this, and he is talking history, mission, vision. On that. This is why I made the distinction. One point about Iran, it's interesting to hear, this Iranian view about Turkey. It's of course completely the mirror image of how Turkey sees Iran. Iran is seen as a big threat in Turkish, within Turkish analyst and policymaker circles. It's a very delicate kind of a relationship. They are dependent in energy terms on Iran. They have to negotiate very carefully what they do. They bent over backwards to make sure that this radar is definitely not against Iran, certainly not for Israel. So it's a much more, they're really being very, very careful because they understand their vulnerability. And this is an important thing to see. They don't see themselves as a model to Iran or as a threat to Iran in any way. And I think in many ways they're right, because Ofer told you that this model has been around for 10 years. Nothing happened. So that's what I had to say.
Okay, thank you. As Professor Toledano said, our time, first it contracted, now it's expanding. It's sort of like the timeline for Iran's march to nuclear weapons. So we can have another round if there are some more questions. And so, yes, and then...
Can I have an observation rather than
Observation, we don't have observation.
Yeah, observations are okay.
Okay.
They're legal, because we have time.
May I beg to differ with Professor Keshe-Balaban about the dominance of the Islamism in Turkish foreign policy. I think that both ideology and in practice, when you have a prime minister who says, who believes that Muslims should have a seat in the United Nations Security Council. This is for me an ideological perception of foreign policy of Turkey. Or when he says, I think when he referred to al-Bashir, he said, I don't believe that a Muslim can commit crimes against humanity. This is also not a practical foreign policy, but rather a perception of an ideological perception. And in practice, actually, you know that the relations of Turkey bilaterally with countries in the region and beyond the region is proactive policies in multilateral organizations such as the OIC, the D8, and so on, which were unknown before AKP came to power. I think all this manifests. And you alluded to the fact that also bilateral relations with Israel were influenced actually by this Islamic approach. I think all this proves that this is a much more dominant factor in contemporary Turkish foreign policy than people normally relate to.
There was a question over here.
discussing the possibility of the so-called, what you refer to as a Cold War, isn't that Iraq is really field of the Cold War between Turkey? Because that many analysts, as you pointed to, many analysts in Turkey actually see as the field of the Cold War between Iran and Turkey, the Iraq. So can you respond to that? Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes. Okay.
Turkey tried to integrate European community. Now it was by don't know what reason refused. So Turkey turned its way back to what it was its former territory, I mean the Ottoman Empire. Now as the Muslims, I mean the Arabs, don't like the Turkey by history. Turkey is trying to recreate in a certain way the Ottoman Empire based on economy. Does it succeed? Yes or no?
Can you repeat the last sentence?
No. Turkey want to, because it was refused
and
to Europe, so it turned its way back to east and south in a certain way. As it is a wealthy country, industrialized and everything, they want to create again, on base of economic, the Ottoman Empire. Will they succeed? Because the Muslims, the Arab Muslims, they have a bad memory about the Turkish sovereignty. This is the question. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to go back to our speakers, and then we'll wrap up. So, Professor, yes, Kozabalaban.
I think I would agree with you in the sense that any country, I think I tried also to explain this, one of the ingredients of foreign policy is identity. And in a country's composition of population, whether it is Muslim, Christian, or Jewish, influences its foreign policy. For example, I can say, that if the United States population were to be Muslim majority, I think its foreign policy towards Israel would be different. And it's not only Turkey, but also other Muslim countries. They have even much more, radical approach towards Israel. So Turkey at least maintains a diplomatic relationship even under this government. But it shouldn't be exaggerated. This component, this ingredient in foreign policy that comes from identity should not be exaggerated. There are important material interests at stake, and those material interests also shaped, foreign policy. It is not as clear as one can describe that Islamism shapes this foreign policy. No, there are other reasons. But it's one of the ingredients, I can say, and not only to do with this government's identity, but also to do with the country's overall identity. And Islam is the core portion of Kemalist identity as well. One of the earliest foreign policy decisions of the Republican regime was to sign an exchange agreement, population exchange agreement with Greece, and that was based on religion rather than on nationality. So the word Turkish was not even used in that agreement. It was rather Muslim versus Orthodox Christian. So Orthodox Christians who spoke Turkish as a native language were, deported, and Muslims who were not Turkish were deported back to Turkey. So this was a key component of the Kemalist identities, and the crisis with Israel, how other parties in Turkey approach to this crisis. There is no criticism against this government in terms of what it did in its relations with Israel, the crisis, etc. The opposition parties, including the CHP, which is a very secular opposition party, seculars in quotes, for the reasons I explained, were that the government is too soft. It needs to be more, strict and more harsh than what it did. So therefore, you have almost a consensus on this, and this is what I can only say. But the bad memory, of course, the history presents an important memory, but I will shift to your question after that. But again, I think it shouldn't be exaggerated. I have been to many Arab countries, and there is still, especially what the Turkish-Israeli crisis works is to better, improve the relations in terms of Arab public opinion about Turkey. And I think the soft power policy works in that sense. Yes, if the European, but there is no still refusal from the European Union against Turkey. I mean, there is no official rejection of Turkish membership. The membership process still continues, but it is very ambivalent. So the prospects don't look bright, So therefore, it forces the government or forces any government that would be in place today in Turkey to look east, not only because the Europe rejects Turkey, but also I think there is an emerging consensus among Turkish economists that if Turkey was part of the European Union today, it would suffer from a crisis that Greece or Portugal suffers, So I think that the national currency, and the border, the trade, despite the customs union, we still maintain a kind of protection of Turkish national economy, are important tools in the hands of a government. At the time of crisis, you can utilize currency manipulations, in terms of devaluations, etc., to control the prices of your national goods, etc. Greece today cannot do neither currency devaluation nor trade barriers. So they lost these two key tools to protect their national economy against the German expansion of markets. So a number of Turkish economists consider the EU as a German expansion or the French expansion. So today Turkish economy is in a very good situation, to be honest with you, and therefore the enthusiasm about the membership is getting lost. I think that's not good, for political reasons, for the reasons of democratization. And I also don't like that the Prime Minister is now using this death penalty card. He's not going to implement this, but he's using that to scare the Kurdish opposition or to scare the European Union that we can cut our hopes, review, and then turn. No, this is still we need to be practical and pragmatic about this. Turkey still needs this membership process in order to improve its democratization, and also economically Turkey is very strongly tied to Europe. 60% of Turkish cars that are driven in Turkey are European. So where are you going? You cannot just go to Russia. So therefore this relationship is not as clear as like a rejection or acceptance, but the process continues. Neither side is very happy about this. I think either side would be happy if one say no. We are just ending the deal. So that's my thinking. Yeah, thank you.
Just okay. Thank you. In terms of the Cold War between Iran and Turkey in Iraq, if you look, I think the Cold War is much more applicable to Iran and Saudi Arabia in Iraq, where the Saudis support some of the Al-Qaeda movement, some of the Al-Qaeda groups there to kill Shiites, and the Iranians are supporting some of the Jaish al-Mahdi and other people to undermine the government, and Muqtada al-Sadr, of course. The Iranian-Turkish differences are not to the point of killing each other, sponsoring the killing of the other side. And the hostility is nowhere near that. This is why I would call it intense competition rather than Cold War. Of course, the Iranians are very displeased that the Turks accepted Mr. Tariq al-Hashemi, the former prime minister of Iraq, who is vice president. Thank you. The former vice president of Iraq, who is in Turkey now, and the Iranians want him to go back to Iraq to answer charges of the Nouri al-Maliki government. But again, that's much more competition rather than the Cold War. And just one point, Professor Koshebalaban talked about the perception of Turkey in the Arab world because of what happened with Israel. I have to say that one of the few rays of sunshine, and believe me, these days there are not many of them, for the Iranian foreign policy is the current rift between Israel and Turkey. This is something that really the Iranians, this is one of the few slivers of hope that they have, that they continues. Sometimes they're worried when there are noises of improvement. I remember reading an article in the regime mouthpiece Press TV talking about this possibility, but they were saying, but Avigdor Lieberman is against it, so therefore it won't happen. So it was like they were looking at Avigdor Lieberman as somebody who will basically make sure that that this won't happen. So everything's okay, guys. Victor Lieberman will make sure that this won't happen. So Mr. Lieberman seems to have some supporters here in Israel. It seems to me that he also has some supporters in the Iranian foreign ministry, because as long as he keeps Israel and Turkey apart, they'll be very happy.
Thank you. Professor Toledano.
And I'll be brief. I have to disagree with both the assumptions of the question and the answer. I don't think Turkey has any idea of reviving the Ottoman Empire in the Arab world or anywhere else. Not as a soft power and not as a hard power. It's just not in the cards. It's the Ottomanism and neo-Ottomanism, so to speak, is a concept. It's something that is that informs and inspires, perhaps, but has no practical or pragmatic policy implications, and therefore, whether the Arabs, who are the Arabs, by the way, in which country, what level are we talking about? Are we talking about the Arab street? Are we talking about Arab elites? Whether they like or do not like the Turks, and who are these Turks, is a question that cannot be answered appropriately by academics who deal with such things seriously, and therefore have to understand who are they talking about. So therefore, I think one of the problems that Erdogan had at the beginning was that he thought that you win elections in Turkey by being popular on the Arab street. So he did certain things, but that was not the idea. Was not the rejection of Europe, and Europe has rejected Turkey. It had not given Turkey an answer. No, you're not admitted, and it's continuing negotiations, and maybe now it will be renewed, and maybe this chapter and that chapter will be also concluded. Out of 34 chapters, I think they've agreed about 10 maybe, and even that is iffy. So it's virtually, and for all intents and purposes, a no answer, at least no for the time being. And Turkey understands it this way, and it was offended, but that was certainly not the reason why it turned eastwards. Not at all. This is a repositioning, a geostrategic repositioning of Turkey, new Turkey, in its concept of where it wants to be in the region and globally, and it has not withdrawn its request to join the Union. It did not withdraw from NATO. It has good relations with the United States. So it's all wrong, basically. But anyway, this is what I think.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to go almost directly to the final keynote lecture, so stay around. It's Tzipi Livni. Please join me in a round of applause for this excellent panel. Thank you.